Scripture lesson today is taken from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Well, one of the most famous corporate mottos in recent decades was Google's first motto, "Don't be evil." All right? But by the way, a few years ago, they dropped this from their code of conduct, and I'm wondering if that now means it's okay. All right? But it came out of an early part of their development where, as a search engine, right? I mean, how many of us depend on Google, all right? There might be a few Bing users out there, but I'm a Google person. All right? And so you search, and they knew that that they had the opportunity to play dirty. They had the opportunity to manipulate search results in such a way that would be evil. And so one of their executives, one of their top execs, wrote down as one of the things we would be is, "Don't be evil." And that became their motto. It became their number one thing that they talked about within the company is, whatever you do, don't be evil. Now, what's interesting about this is that there's nothing positive in it. Right? There's nothing about what we want to do. It's not, there's nothing like we're going to be the number one search engine in the world, or you'll be able to find anything you're looking for. It was just, don't be evil. It was a ground floor expectation of how they would behave. And this is really what Jesus is kind of doing here. See, there's an interesting thing about this passage known as the Beatitudes, the start of the Sermon on the Mount, because what happens is that it's called the Sermon on the Mount because he goes up the mountain. But Jesus sees the crowds, goes up the mountain, his disciples came to him, and he taught them. He taught the disciples. In fact, from the text, it's not even absolutely clear whether the crowds can hear him. It's presumed that the crowds are within earshot, but he's not talking to them. He's talking to his disciples. This is the employee onboarding experience for Jesus' disciples. He's onboarding them with this talk. He's telling them this is what it's going to be a part of this organization. And as far as the crowds are concerned, note that he's talking about them in the third person, right? He's not talking to them, he's talking about them. Because everything he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." It's all they. Because he's talking to the disciples. All right? So it's like you're onboarding somewhere and they go, "Well, here's how you treat our customers." Okay? Our customers are the they, but I'm talking to you about how you treat our customers. I'm talking to you. And with regard to this, when this happens, there's often a ceiling and a floor. There's things we strive to achieve, and then a minimum of expectation of how we're going to behave in getting there. All right? So we often talk about mission and values. All right? There's what we want to achieve, and then there's the values we'll have while we're achieving them. There's the aspirational aspect of what we want to do, and the foundational aspect of how we will be as we get there. And what he's doing here is he's laying a foundation for how his followers are going to regard the people who are coming to him. Now, in the modern day and age, it can seem a little strange what he's talking about because we don't have the same cultural biases that they had 2,000 years ago, or not always, all right? And so we see things through a modern lens, sometimes not understanding the way they understood the world. And if you don't remember how they understood the world back then, you're not necessarily going to get the full gist of what Jesus is trying to say. For instance, when he says, "Blessed are those who mourn." By the way, this is how you know he's talking about other people, because don't ever say this to someone who's mourning, right? You don't go up to someone who's in mourning and say, "Oh, but you're blessed." At least I recommend not. But remember that one of the things that was present in that time was the belief that if something happened, it was the person's fault. It was your fault. If a tragedy happened, it was sin being punished in the person's life, all right? So that was a common belief then. I hope we don't have that belief now. We should not have that belief now, and we shouldn't have the belief now because Jesus was teaching that belief out of us, all right? Jesus was teaching that belief away from us, and so it was a matter of saying, blessed are those who mourn. It's not their sin being punished that caused the loss. They're blessed. They're going to be comforted. Blessed are the meek. Right? Even today, meekness is not a compliment. All right? And so Jesus is saying, take these people who you ordinarily would not think well of. You might think that there's something that they did that caused it or something that they ought not be. And he's saying, look, I'm going to turn this around. So to paraphrase this to me, when I read these two things and I hear it, what I hear is more like, blessed are those who've lost. Blessed are the meek, the ones who are willing to lose, the ones who are willing to submit. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the ones in mourning, because they're going to appreciate a victory. They're going to appreciate something on the other side. They aren't losers, they're pre-winners. And giving us a different outlook on the people that we encounter is what Jesus is doing. All of his sayings are trying to recast the way his disciples see the people who are coming to him. And so he says, look at this. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Great. But that's often, something that's not going to happen in this life. Blessed are the merciful. Merciful. In that culture and sometimes in ours, mercy is considered weakness. Mercy was going to make you a chump. Right? So many times they were taught, if you have your enemy down, finish them off. Because if you don't finish them off, they're going to come back and get you. Mercy? Don't show mercy. That's weakness. And we still get that a lot in our world today. When you've got them down, finish them. But Jesus is saying, no. Look at this. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, those who are merciful, they're not looking at themselves, they're looking at others. So Jesus is kind of saying, blessed are those who put others first. This will come back to them. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, fairness, justice for others. Blessed are those who are merciful, who think about the person who you have the advantage over as opposed to your own advantage and your own gain and your own win. Blessed are those who put others first. It's going to come around. It's going to make the world a better place. He's teaching that this isn't stupid. This doesn't make you a loser. You're blessed. Next two things he says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And I don't know about you, but the first time I heard this, the word that came into my brain, word association, was naive. Blessed are the peacemakers. Sounds great. Except, again, in an age of tribalism, the peacemaker is the one who refuses to say that the world is my tribe against your tribe, my people against your people. The peacemaker is the one who says, no. Let's get together. I'm not going to play this game of my tribe against your tribe, my family against your family. So I think you take these two things, and to me what it says is, blessed are the idealists, because they'll see a better world. Blessed are the ones who hold out for the ideals of having a purity of heart in how they see the world. Because sometimes we mock idealists. You have idealists and people go, oh, come on, that's not how the world works. You can't succeed that way. You can't do it this way. The world's going to chew you up and spit you out. But what happens is, it's really negative, is that when we have that attitude, what ends up happening is that when a person is idealistic and it doesn't work, we put the blame in the wrong place. We blame them. Oh, come on, you were idealistic. Are you kidding? You knew that wouldn't work. But tell you this, when idealism doesn't work, you don't blame the person who's being idealistic, you blame the system. Because that means the system is wrong. Because if the system is healthy, idealism should work. If a system is healthy, idealism should happen, right? And so you put the blame in the wrong place. When people who are good and fair and hardworking fail, they're not the problem, the system's the problem. And we often have a tendency in certain situations, different for each one of us depending on what baggage we bring, we might blame the victim. Sometimes we see a victim in our time and blame them. Happens a lot with the poor. A lot of people blame them. It's your fault you're poor. It's not the world, it's not the society, it's not the economy, it's not whatever, it's your fault you're poor. Lost your job? What did you do wrong? As opposed to a political battle in your company or a heartless employer or someone who just wants to get a bigger bonus by cutting payroll, okay? Blame the person. I've seen people get scammed, and people blame them. The number one blame, you get scammed, my number one blame is the scammer. Right? That's who's at fault, is the scammer. You get victimized, you're not to blame. Failed relationships, what's wrong with you? See, you may not do that in all of these kinds of cases, but for most of us, there's probably some of these cases where we do that, where we see a person who's in a bad way, and we actually blame them. And the reason why Jesus needs to lay these teachings on his disciples is because the crowds are coming to him, and the crowds, if you remember, they were full of people with need. They were people who needed healing. They were people who were hungry. They were people who were losing or had lost loved ones. And what's happening here, which is so important, is that Jesus is saying when you see these crowds coming to you that have need, don't start blaming them. Don't start doing what the society does and says there's something wrong with them. They did something. They're being punished. No. Have a different attitude when you see them coming to you. Because the reality is that the attitude we bring to that will change what we see. Our predisposition dictates our experiences. Our predisposition to see people with compassion versus seeing them with judgment will dictate the experience we have in that interaction. So Jesus was recasting for the disciples the way they should see the crowds of people who would be coming. This is how I need you to see them. I need you to see them not as people who are lazier or people who are sinners. I need you to see people who are blessed. I need you to see people that God loves, that God cares about, that God would call blessed. The predisposition is so important. It's at the root of so many horrible things. This terrible thing in Memphis, Tyre Nichols. I won't watch the video. Okay, I won't because I just know it would hurt my soul. Okay, so I just won't. And one of the things I thought about this, okay, of course it's horrible, but when I read about they've disbanded the unit that those officers were a part of, and what I thought was, they named the unit Scorpion. What do you think is going to happen when you name the unit Scorpion? What are you saying? I mean, if I'm an officer, I'm carrying a gun, and I go, oh yeah, I'm a part of Scorpion. What's the attitude I'm bringing? Before I see anyone, before I meet anyone, what's the attitude that I'm bringing because you've named my unit Scorpion? What do scorpions do? They sting. So you give a group of people an aggressive name to begin with. You're telling them that that aggression is a part of your identity as a unit. Right? Should have named them the kittens, the puppies. Because it does make a difference, right? That's why you don't see sports teams named the puppies. They always name them after predators. Because that's the attitude they want them to bring to the game. And then what's the attitude they bring to situations? Yes, they were officers of color, but there was a good editorial in the Washington Post reminding us that don't forget that just because they're officers of color, people of color are not immune to bringing negative predispositions about persons of color. Officers of color can still bring a negative predisposition to an interaction about citizens of color. Could ask my mother about Koreans and she would have told you things, okay? So members of a group are not immune to thinking negative things about their own groups. It happens all the time. But if you name a group of officers Scorpions, and if they have a predisposition to see a citizen of, and especially a citizen of color, and instead of seeing a person they are called to serve and protect, they see a person who's a criminal. If they bring that predisposition to the interaction, how does it change the interaction? And then worse, not worse, but the flip side of what happens then is another negative outcome is we stop bringing a predisposition to interactions with law enforcement. That they are there to serve and protect us. Both of those things will cause the system to break down. What you need is officers who see every citizen they encounter as someone they are there to serve and protect, so that we can see every officer as someone who is there to serve and protect us. That predisposition is the problem. If you walk into every encounter expecting to see someone who's going to hurt you, it's going to happen way more often. But there's a simple way we can start to deal with this, at least in our own lives. I can't solve society's problems, wish I could. But one of my favorite authors is Anne Lamott. Okay, I love Anne Lamott, love her writings. And the cover of Traveling Mercies, by the way, is a picture of the front of our church. So it's our church on the cover of Traveling Mercies. But if you know her story, she had a very troubled life for many years. She battled with substance abuse, and she came to faith in a little Presbyterian church in California and got clean, sober. And she still teaches Sunday school to this day in this little Presbyterian church out in California. And she told a story in this book, Grace Eventually being an important part of that. It tells a really funny story. So she goes to a carpet store. Her kids in church school were sitting on a hard floor, and she decided that they could use something softer to sit on. So she goes to a carpet store and sees this remnant that would be perfect for the kids to sit on, the right size, and so she buys it for $50, brings it back to the church, and when she unrolls it, there's a huge moldy spot in the middle. So she rolls it back up, takes it back to the store, and the owner won't refund her money. So she gets angry, so angry that she goes back with a friend to be angry with her, so the two of them can be angry at the owner, and they finally just get the owner, and he finally writes them a check for $50, and she takes it to the bank, and it bounces. And she said, for whatever reason, in that moment, she's just started to laugh. All she could do is just start to laugh. She said she laughed so hard it sounded like the teller had just given her $100. But she changed her mind about what this happened, and what she did was she actually said she wrote a letter to the owner of the carpet store apologizing for being so angry with him. and bought a bouquet of flowers at the supermarket, went to the store, and the store was closed. And so she left the note and the flowers on the door. And then the next day, she called. So she writes this. She says, "I called the carpet store. I got your letter," he said. "That was a decent thing." And just as I began to savor his words, he added, "But you behaved badly." Oh, that's how the world works, right? So she wrote this. She said, "I had behaved badly. It all started up in me again. But this time it didn't take over because something got there first." And what had happened was, in the meantime, her heart had filled with the love of God. And with her heart filled with love, the anger couldn't take over. And so she wrote this about that. She said, "You want to know how big God's love is? The answer is, it's bigger than you're comfortable with." See, that's the thing. In worldly terms, she lost. She was out the $50 and the cost of the flowers. He didn't so much as apologize. All right? So in worldly terms, she lost. But in the words that Jesus is teaching us, in the attitude Jesus is teaching us, she won. She was a winner. But what had happened in between was her heart was filled with love. And isn't it true that what's in us dictates what we see? Because I've noticed this about me. The majority of my angry responses happen because I'm already angry. I'm driving and somebody cuts me off. My response isn't because they cut me off. My response is because it depends on whether I'm already mad. When I'm angry and you cut me off, yeah, I don't have a dash cam. If I'm in a good mood and you cut me off, bounces off my back, right? What I bring to it is what matters. So what matters in how I interact with the world is what got there first. And if God's love gets there first, everything else changes. And you get to choose what fills your heart. And what fills your heart first will change all the interactions you have during the day, during your life. You pre-fill your heart with mercy. You pre-fill your heart with compassion. You pre-fill your heart with love, and that will change everything you see. And it will change everything you see, even when it's really hard. Because the last of the things Jesus says is where it really gets tough, when he says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And this is bad enough. And you can read this and go, yeah, okay, all right, sure, that's going to happen, and I feel badly for them. But after this, Jesus turns from third person to talking to them. He goes, suddenly it's not third person anymore. Blessed are you. It's no longer they. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Wow. Really? This is now a much harder teaching. It's one thing to teach me about thinking about the negative things that happen to others. And now it's you. Blessed are you when this happens. But remember what Anne said. God's love is bigger than you're comfortable with. It's bigger than you're comfortable with because we're not comfortable with a love so big that it would make us handle being persecuted, because we don't want to be. But Jesus is saying that God's love is so big, God's love is so strong, that even when this happens to you, you can rejoice and be glad. That's a love that's bigger than I'm comfortable with. To rejoice and be glad in the face of persecution. But God's love is that big. And it can fill your heart first. And when it fills your heart, it doesn't leave room for the other things. And so his disciples got their marching orders to see those crowds with love and compassion. And even though the crowds would drive them crazy at times, and the people would drive them nuts, they were able to deal because the love got there first. And you choose what will fill your heart before you go out into the world. And it will change the way you see the world. Amen.